It started with snickers about her bright pink laptop covered in rainbow stickers. 3 senior engineers surrounded her workstation, making jokes loud enough for the entire cybersecurity conference to hear. One of them pointed at her Hello Kitty mousepad and said, "Look what walked out of a teenager's bedroom and into a defense contractor meeting." They laughed, took photos, even started a group chat calling her Princess Protocol. But when that pink laptop started displaying classified satellite trajectory data that only 5 people in the Pentagon had access to, their laughter died in their throats. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When those same men who'd mocked her kawaii aesthetic found themselves face down on the conference room floor, with federal agents reading them their rights, they finally understood what kind of mistake they'd made. Want to know what turned 3 arrogant cybersecurity experts into suspected foreign assets? And why that pink laptop became the most important piece of technology in the building that day? I was working late shift security at the Palladium Convention Center in downtown Seattle when the Department of Defense's annual cybersecurity symposium rolled into town. 3 days of the country's top defense contractors, military intelligence officers, and government cybersecurity specialists gathering to discuss threats most civilians never hear about. The kind of meeting where everyone's background gets vetted 6 months in advance, and cell phones get locked in metal boxes at the entrance. The October rain hammered against the convention center's glass walls with that relentless Pacific Northwest persistence that makes you forget what sunshine looks like. Inside, the air conditioning fought against the heat generated by hundreds of laptops, servers, and the nervous energy of people whose mistakes could compromise national security. Coffee stations ran empty every hour, refilled by catering staff who'd undergone background checks more thorough than most job interviews. I'd been walking security rounds for 12 years, seen every kind of corporate event imaginable, but defense contractor meetings had their own particular atmosphere. Conversations stopped when strangers approached. People instinctively positioned their screens away from walking traffic. Everyone carried themselves with the hyper-aware posture of individuals who knew that foreign intelligence services would pay serious money for a single photograph of the wrong presentation slide. The main conference hall buzzed with controlled energy. Rows of tables equipped with encrypted network connections hosted laptops worth more than most people's cars. Presentations covered everything from next-generation firewall architectures to advanced persistent threat detection systems. The attendee badges showed company affiliations that read like a directory of America's military-industrial complex: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, plus dozens of smaller firms whose names meant nothing to civilians, but everything to people who understood how modern warfare actually worked. That's where I first noticed her, sitting alone at a table near the back corner of the room, completely absorbed in whatever was running on her laptop screen. While everyone else dressed in conservative business attire, she wore an oversized lavender sweater, white jeans, and sneakers with LED lights that blinked when she walked. Her laptop was the most aggressively feminine thing I'd ever seen in a professional setting. Bubblegum pink with a rainbow gradient Apple logo, covered in stickers of anime characters, unicorns, and inspirational quotes written in glittery cursive fonts. Her workstation looked like it belonged in a teenage girl's bedroom rather than a classified government briefing. Hello Kitty mousepad, a coffee mug shaped like a cartoon cat, pens topped with fuzzy pom-poms, and a small succulent in a pot decorated with smiling emoji faces. She had her long black hair pulled back with clips that sparkled under the fluorescent lights, and whenever she concentrated on her screen, she unconsciously twisted a strand around her finger like a nervous high school student. Most of the other attendees gave her table a wide berth, probably assuming she was someone's assistant, or maybe an intern who'd wandered into the wrong conference room. She looked barely old enough to have graduated college, much less hold the kind of security clearance required to attend this event. While seasoned cybersecurity professionals debated advanced threat vectors and nation-state attack methodologies, she sat quietly, occasionally typing with the rapid-fire precision that suggested serious coding skills, but otherwise seeming almost invisible in the room full of military contractors and government officials. I learned later that her name was Maya Chen, though that wasn't the name on her conference badge. Her real identity, like everything else about her presence at this symposium, existed several classification levels above what most attendees were cleared to know about. The pink laptop that made her look like she'd stumbled in from an anime convention was actually running software that didn't officially exist, connected to systems that most people in that room had never heard of, executing protocols that were developed in secure facilities, where even the janitors held top-secret clearances. But at first glance, all anyone saw was a young woman who looked completely out of place among the gray-suited professionals and their serious black ThinkPads. Her appearance practically screamed harmless, non-threatening, probably more interested in social media than cybersecurity, which, I would soon learn, was exactly the point. The trouble started during the afternoon break on the second day. 3 senior engineers from different companies had clustered around the coffee station, comparing notes on presentation topics and sharing the kind of shop talk that fills gaps between formal sessions. Marcus Webb from Cyber Defense Solutions, a man in his early 40s with the confidence that comes from 20 years of government contracts and military clearances. David Park from Systems Integration Corp., younger but equally arrogant, the kind of guy who name-dropped classified projects to impress people at networking events. And James Rodriguez from Advanced Network Security, whose company specialized in protecting critical infrastructure from foreign cyber attacks. All 3 were the type who'd earned their reputations by being the smartest person in most rooms they entered. They'd briefed Pentagon officials, consulted on congressional cybersecurity legislation, and spoke at conferences where admission required background investigations. In their world, expertise came with gray hair, expensive suits, and the kind of gravitas that made junior employees nervous. So when they noticed Maya's workstation during their coffee break, their reaction was predictably dismissive. "Would you look at that?" Webb said, gesturing toward Maya's table with his coffee cup. "Somebody's daughter must have gotten lost on the way to Comic-Con." The others followed his gaze and burst into the kind of laughter that carries an edge of cruelty. Park pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "This is going straight to LinkedIn. Caption: when your intern thinks she's at a different kind of conference." He zoomed in on the Hello Kitty mousepad and the anime stickers covering her laptop. "I mean, seriously, who approved her credentials?" Rodriguez shook his head with exaggerated disbelief. "That setup probably cost less than my laptop bag. Look at those stickers. I haven't seen that many unicorns since my 8-year-old's birthday party." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. $20 says she's here because Daddy works for one of the prime contractors and pulled strings to get his princess into the cool kids meeting. Their mockery attracted attention from nearby tables. Other attendees started glancing over at Maya's workstation, some chuckling at the contrast between her kawaii aesthetic and the serious business atmosphere. A few people took discreet photos of their own. Someone started a group chat called Princess Protocol and began sharing images of her setup with commentary that grew increasingly mean-spirited as more people joined the conversation. Maya seemed oblivious to the attention her appearance was generating. She remained focused on her screen, occasionally typing in short bursts that suggested she was responding to messages or updating code. Her posture stayed relaxed, professional, like someone completely comfortable with whatever she was working on. If she noticed the stares and whispered comments, she gave no indication that it bothered her. But I noticed something the others missed during their mockery session. When Maya typed, her fingers moved with the kind of muscle memory that comes from years of serious coding work. When she paused to think, her eyes tracked movement around the room, with the subtle awareness of someone trained to notice potential threats. And when someone walked behind her table, she instinctively angled her screen away from their line of sight, a habit that spoke of handling sensitive information on a regular basis. The mockery escalated during the next presentation break. Webb, Park, and Rodriguez had apparently spent the entire session crafting increasingly elaborate jokes about Maya's appearance and assumed qualifications. They approached her table as a group, their confidence boosted by the audience they'd gathered through social media ridicule. "Excuse me, miss," Webb said in the overly polite tone people use when they're about to be deliberately condescending. "I think you might be in the wrong conference room. The social media influencer meetup is probably down the hall." Maya looked up from her laptop screen for the first time, her expression neutral and professional. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied quietly. Her voice carried a slight accent that suggested English wasn't her first language, which only seemed to encourage their assumptions about her qualifications. Park stepped closer, his phone already recording. "Really? because this is a pretty high-level discussion about classified defense systems. Are you sure you have the right clearance level for this kind of meeting? He gestured toward her laptop. I mean, that setup looks more appropriate for a high school computer class than a Department of Defense symposium. My clearance is current and appropriate for this event, Maya said, her tone remaining calm despite the obvious harassment. She closed her laptop slightly, not enough to shut down whatever she was working on, but enough to prevent the growing crowd from seeing her screen. Rodriguez joined the conversation with a grin that had nothing friendly about it. Current and appropriate? Sweetheart, do you even know what kind of systems we're discussing here? This isn't about building websites or managing Instagram accounts. We're talking about protecting critical national infrastructure from hostile foreign actors. The crowd around them had grown larger. Other conference attendees were recording the interaction on their phones, some openly laughing at what they perceived as an obvious case of mistaken identity or fraudulent credentials. Maya had become unwitting entertainment for a room full of cybersecurity professionals who should have known better than to make assumptions based on appearances. I understand exactly what systems are being discussed, Maya replied. And I understand the threat vectors better than you might expect. She opened her laptop again and began typing something, her fingers moving across the keyboard with rapid precision. Webb laughed outright. Threat vectors? Did you learn that phrase from a YouTube video? Listen, kid, why don't you pack up your little pink computer and let the adults handle the serious business? I'm sure there's a Starbucks somewhere in this building where you can work on your social media posts. That's when Maya made a decision that would change everything for everyone in that room. She turned her laptop screen toward the crowd that had gathered around her table, revealing something that made every conversation in the vicinity stop dead. Her desktop wasn't displaying anime wallpapers or social media feeds. Instead, her screen showed a real-time satellite tracking interface with orbital trajectories, signal strength indicators, and data streams that were definitely not available to civilian contractors. The software interface looked like something from a science fiction movie, but the technical details were unmistakably real. Satellite designations, encrypted communication channels, orbital mechanics calculations updating in real time, and a command console that suggested direct communication capabilities with systems orbiting hundreds of miles above Earth. The kind of interface that required security clearances most people in that room couldn't even apply for. These are the threat vectors I monitor, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. Foreign signals intelligence, orbital debris tracking, electromagnetic interference patterns, and communication intercepts from hostile nations attempting to compromise our satellite networks. The room went completely silent. Phones stopped recording. The group chat messages stopped appearing. Everyone within sight of Maya's screen was staring at data displays that clearly exceeded their clearance levels, realizing they were looking at something they weren't supposed to see. Rodriguez stepped backward, his face going pale. "Where did you get access to that interface?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's fingers moved across her keyboard again, and the display shifted to show different data streams. "I didn't get access to anything," she replied. "I designed this system. I wrote the protocols. I manage the security architecture that keeps these satellites operational and protected from the exact kind of foreign cyber attacks your companies are hired to prevent." Park's phone slipped from his hands and clattered on the floor. Webb looked like he was about to be sick. The crowd that had gathered to watch Maya get embarrassed was now staring at classified information that could result in serious federal charges if it ended up in the wrong hands. That's when I noticed 3 people in dark suits walking quickly across the conference hall toward Maya's table. They weren't registered attendees. They didn't have conference badges. And they moved with the purposeful coordination of federal agents responding to a security breach. Behind them, a woman in military uniform was speaking urgently into a communications device, her expression suggesting that whatever was happening at Maya's table had attracted attention from much higher up the chain of command than anyone in that room was prepared to deal with. The pink laptop that had been the source of so much mockery was about to become the center of a security incident that would end careers, trigger federal investigations, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look completely harmless. The lead agent reached Maya's table before anyone else could react. He was tall, wore an expensive suit that screamed federal government, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made experienced security personnel like me instinctively step aside. His badge appeared in his hand so quickly I almost missed the movement, but the gold shield and FBI credentials were unmistakable. "Everyone step back from this workstation immediately," he commanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "This area is now under federal jurisdiction pending a security assessment." The crowd that had gathered to watch Maya get humiliated began scrambling backward, suddenly realizing they'd witnessed something that could land them in federal prison. Phones disappeared into pockets. The group chat that had been mocking her aesthetic went silent as participants deleted messages and tried to pretend they'd never been involved. Maya remained seated, her fingers still positioned over her keyboard, completely calm despite having 3 federal agents surrounding her table. She looked up at the lead agent with the kind of recognition that suggested this wasn't their first meeting. "Agent Morrison," she said quietly. "I wasn't expecting field support today." Morrison's expression shifted from official authority to something approaching relief. "Dr. Chen, we've been monitoring unusual network activity from this location for the past 20 minutes. Your system triggered multiple security alerts at Cheyenne Mountain." The woman in military uniform arrived at Maya's table, slightly out of breath from crossing the conference hall at double time. Her rank insignia identified her as a lieutenant colonel, and the unit patches on her sleeve belonged to organizations that most people in that room had never heard of. She approached Maya with the deference that senior military officers reserve for civilians whose expertise exceeds their own understanding. "Dr. Chen, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez from Cyber Command. We need to verify the security status of your current session immediately." She glanced at the crowd of contractors and government employees who were still staring despite the FBI agent's instructions. "This needs to happen in a secure environment." Maya nodded and began typing a sequence of commands that caused her screen to display what looked like a shutdown procedure. But I caught a glimpse of the interface before it closed, and what I saw made my 12 years of security experience feel completely inadequate. Her pink laptop wasn't just displaying satellite data. It was actively controlling systems that were currently orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. Webb, Park, and Rodriguez stood frozen near Maya's table, their faces cycling through various shades of pale as they began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. The woman they'd mocked for looking like a teenager with a toy computer was apparently important enough to trigger an immediate federal response when her work got interrupted. "Gentlemen," Agent Morrison said, turning his attention to the 3 engineers, "I need to see your identification and conference credentials immediately." Rodriguez fumbled for his badge with shaking hands. "Sir, we didn't know. We thought she was just some kid who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. We were just trying to be helpful." "Helpful," Morrison repeated, his tone suggesting that wasn't the word he would have chosen. "By recording classified information without authorization? By creating a security incident that required federal agents to respond? By potentially compromising operations that are above your clearance level?" Park stepped forward, trying to salvage something from the situation. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Agent Morrison, there's been a misunderstanding. We're senior cybersecurity professionals with top-secret clearances. We were just concerned about conference security protocols." Lieutenant Colonel Martinez looked up from Maya's laptop screen where she'd been observing the shutdown sequence. "Top-secret clearances," she said with barely contained irritation. "Dr. Chen's current project requires clearances that are compartmentalized beyond anything you've ever heard of. The systems she manages are classified at levels that require congressional notification." Maya finished her shutdown procedure and closed her laptop with the same casual movement she might use to close a book, but the simple action carried weight, now that everyone understood what had been running on that pink hardware. She wasn't just another conference attendee. She was someone whose work was so sensitive that interrupting it required federal agents to respond within minutes. "The network session has been terminated and secured," Maya told Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. "All active connections have been encrypted and logged. There was no data compromise during the incident." Morrison opened a small notebook and began taking down information. "Dr. Chen, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened here. Start from when these individuals first approached your workstation." Maya's account was precise, professional, and damning. She described the initial mockery, the escalating harassment, the photographs taken without permission, and the group chat that had been created specifically to ridicule her appearance. She spoke without emotion, like someone reporting facts for an official record, but the federal agent's expressions grew more serious with each detail. "You photographed her workstation?" Morrison asked Webb, whose face had gone completely white. "Just the stickers and the mousepad," Webb stammered. "We thought it was funny. We didn't know she was anyone important." "Important," Lieutenant Colonel Martinez repeated. "Dr. Chen manages cybersecurity for systems that protect this country from electromagnetic pulse attacks, orbital debris threats, and foreign attempts to disable our satellite communications. Her work directly impacts the ability of our military to operate in contested environments." The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was slowly dispersing as people realized they'd witnessed something that could affect their security clearances. Conference attendees were deleting photos, leaving the area, and probably making mental notes to never speak of what they'd seen. The kind of incident that gets buried in official reports and forgotten by everyone involved. But Webb, Park, and Rodriguez couldn't simply walk away. They'd created a federal security incident by harassing someone whose work was classified beyond their ability to comprehend. Agent Morrison was still taking notes. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez was making phone calls to report the situation to her chain of command, and Maya was packing up her equipment with the calm efficiency of someone who'd dealt with security breaches before. "Dr. Chen," Morrison said as she zipped her laptop into a protective case that looked considerably more robust than its pink exterior suggested. "Do you need security escort back to your facility?" Maya shouldered her bag, which I now noticed was designed to block electromagnetic signals and probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I'll be fine, Agent Morrison. This wasn't the first time someone made assumptions about my qualifications based on my appearance." "Unfortunately, it probably won't be the last," Lieutenant Colonel Martinez added grimly. "But it will be the last time for these individuals." She turned to face Webb, Park, and Rodriguez with the kind of expression that senior military officers use when they're about to end careers. "Gentlemen, you've just created a security incident involving classified systems and personnel. Your companies will be receiving official notifications within the hour. Your clearances are being suspended pending a full investigation." Rodriguez looked like he was about to collapse. "Suspended? Ma'am, we didn't know. We were just making conversation. You were harassing a federal employee whose work is critical to national security," Martinez replied coldly. "You photographed classified personnel without authorization. You created social media content that could potentially be used by foreign intelligence to identify key individuals. And you did all of this because you assumed someone was unimportant based on their appearance." Webb tried one more appeal. "Lieutenant Colonel, surely there's some way to resolve this without involving our security clearances. We made a mistake, but we're professionals with years of experience." Maya paused in her packing and looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Professional experience should have taught you not to photograph strangers without permission, not to create group chats for the purpose of mocking colleagues, and not to assume that appearance determines capability." She stood up, and for the first time since the incident began, she looked directly at each of the three men who'd spent the last hour making her the target of their entertainment. "Your experience should have also taught you that in cybersecurity, the most dangerous threats often look completely harmless." Agent Morrison closed his notebook and addressed the three engineers with the tone of someone delivering official notification. "Your conference access is being revoked immediately. You'll be escorted from the building, and your companies will receive formal notification of this incident within 2 hours. Any devices that photographed or recorded Dr. Chen or her workstation will be confiscated for security analysis." Park pulled out his phone with trembling hands. "I can delete the photos right now. They're already gone. See?" He showed Morrison a blank photo gallery. "No record of anything. Digital forensics will determine what was actually recorded and whether it was transmitted to anyone else," Morrison replied. "Deleting files doesn't eliminate digital evidence, Mr. Park. You should know that, given your claimed expertise in cybersecurity." Maya walked past the three men toward the conference hall exit, her LED sneakers blinking cheerfully with each step. The contrast between her kawaii aesthetic and the federal security incident she'd just triggered was almost surreal. She looked like someone heading to a cosplay convention, but she was actually someone whose interrupted work had prompted immediate response from multiple federal agencies. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez followed Maya toward the exit, but stopped to address the three engineers one final time. Gentlemen, let me explain something about Dr. Chen that you might find educational. She has a doctorate in orbital mechanics from MIT, dual master's degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, and security clearances that require approval from the National Security Council. She paused to let that information settle before continuing. She designed the encryption protocols that protect our satellite communications from foreign interference. She wrote the software that detects when hostile nations attempt to jam our GPS systems. Her pink laptop has more computing power than the entire server farm your companies use for classified projects. Webb, Park, and Rodriguez stood there, absorbing the reality that they'd spent an hour mocking someone whose qualifications exceeded their own by orders of magnitude. The woman they'd assumed was someone's unqualified daughter was actually one of the most important cybersecurity experts in the federal government. Dr. Chen chooses to maintain a non-threatening appearance because it allows her to work without drawing attention from foreign intelligence services, Martinez continued. You three managed to create more security risk in one afternoon than she's faced in years of classified operations. 2 additional federal agents arrived to escort Webb, Park, and Rodriguez from the building. Their conference badges were confiscated. Their personal devices were seized for analysis, and they were informed that they would be receiving official interviews from federal investigators within the week. As they were led toward the exit, I heard Rodriguez pleading with one of the agents. "Sir, this will destroy our careers. We didn't mean any harm. We just thought she looked out of place." The agent's response was professionally neutral, but offered no comfort. "Mr. Rodriguez, when you work with classified systems, assumptions can have serious consequences. This incident will be thoroughly investigated and documented." Maya had reached the conference hall exit by then, but she paused and looked back at the 3 men being escorted away. For just a moment, her carefully maintained professional composure slipped, and I caught a glimpse of someone who'd probably dealt with this kind of treatment more times than anyone should have to. But then Agent Morrison appeared at her side, and she resumed the calm, competent demeanor that had carried her through the entire incident. They walked out together, her bright pink laptop bag, a splash of color against his serious federal agent attire, while behind them the cybersecurity conference tried to return to normal despite having just witnessed a security incident that would be talked about in classified briefings for months. The conference hall felt different after they left. Conversations were more subdued. People glanced nervously at each other's workstations. The casual atmosphere of professional networking had been replaced by the awareness that federal agents could show up anywhere, anytime, if the wrong person got offended, or if someone photographed the wrong computer screen. I finished my security round with a new appreciation for how little I actually knew about the people I was paid to protect. Maya Chen had sat in that conference hall for 2 days, looking like someone's kid's sister, while managing systems that were critical to national security. Her pink laptop and anime stickers weren't signs of unprofessionalism. They were camouflage that allowed one of the country's most important cybersecurity experts to work without attracting the wrong kind of attention. At least, that had been the plan until 3 arrogant engineers decided that mocking her appearance would make good entertainment for a boring conference afternoon. Now those same men were facing federal investigation, suspended security clearances, and career consequences that would follow them for years. The incident report I filed that evening was the strangest document I'd ever written in 12 years of security work. How do you explain that a woman with a Hello Kitty mousepad had triggered a federal response by revealing that her pink laptop controlled military satellites? How do you describe watching 3 experienced professionals destroy their careers by assuming that cute meant incompetent? But as I finished the report and prepared to go home, I realized that Maya Chen had taught everyone in that conference hall something important about assumptions, appearances, and the dangerous gap between what we think we know and what we actually understand about the people around us. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, Webb, Park, and Rodriguez were facing consequences that would reshape their entire professional lives. Webb's company, Cyber Defense Solutions, received a formal letter from the Department of Defense suspending all current contracts pending a security review. 23 ongoing projects worth nearly $40 million were frozen while federal investigators determined whether Webb's actions had compromised classified information. Park discovered that his social media mockery had been more widely distributed than he'd realized. Screenshots of the group chat had been shared across multiple platforms before he could delete them, and digital forensics experts were now analyzing every device that had received those images. His company's stock price dropped 12% in 2 trading days as investors learned that a senior engineer was under federal investigation for mishandling classified personnel information. Rodriguez faced the most immediate consequences. His employer, Advanced Network Security, terminated his contract within hours of receiving notification from the FBI. The company's CEO issued a public statement distancing the organization from Rodriguez's actions and announcing new training protocols for all employees with security clearances. 22 years of building a reputation in cybersecurity destroyed by one afternoon of assumptions and arrogance. But the ripple effects extended far beyond 3 ruined careers. The cybersecurity community, despite being accustomed to classified information and security protocols, found itself confronting uncomfortable questions about bias, assumptions, and the treatment of colleagues who didn't fit traditional expectations. I learned most of this information during the weeks following the conference, as federal investigators interviewed everyone who'd witnessed the incident. My role as security personnel meant I was questioned extensively about what I'd observed, what I'd heard, and whether I'd noticed any other suspicious behavior during the 3-day event. The FBI agent conducting my interview was thorough, professional, and revealed just enough information to help me understand the scope of what had transpired. Agent Morrison, who'd responded to the initial incident, explained that Maya Chen wasn't just any government contractor. She was part of an elite cybersecurity unit that operated under classification levels most federal employees never encountered. Dr. Chen's work involves systems that are critical to national defense, Morrison told me during our interview. The satellites she monitors and controls are responsible for everything from GPS navigation to encrypted military communications. When her session was interrupted and her screen was photographed, it triggered security protocols that involved multiple agencies. He showed me a heavily redacted report that outlined the immediate response to the incident. Within minutes of Maya revealing her screen to the crowd, automated security systems had detected unusual activity patterns. The satellite systems she was managing had registered an unexpected interruption in their control sequences. Defense agencies across the country had been notified that a classified session had been compromised. The response you witnessed was actually restrained, Morrison continued. Standard protocol for this type of security breach involves immediate facility lockdown and evacuation. Dr. Chen's quick thinking in securing her session prevented a much more serious situation. I started to understand that Maya's calm professionalism during the incident wasn't just personal composure. She'd been managing a potential national security crisis while being harassed by 3 men who assumed she was incompetent based on her appearance. Her ability to maintain operational security while dealing with hostile colleagues had probably prevented a situation that could have made national headlines. The investigation also revealed the sophistication of Maya's operational security measures. Her pink laptop, which had seemed so frivolous to Webb, Park, and Rodriguez, was actually a custom-built system worth more than most people's cars. The cute exterior concealed military-grade encryption hardware, satellite communication capabilities, and processing power that exceeded most corporate server farms. Dr. Chen's cover identity is actually quite brilliant, Morrison explained. Foreign intelligence services spend enormous resources trying to identify key personnel in our cybersecurity infrastructure. By maintaining an appearance that suggests civilian technology user rather than defense contractor, she's been able to operate in public settings without attracting attention. Until 3 arrogant engineers decided to make her the centerpiece of their entertainment, that strategy had worked perfectly. Maya had attended dozens of conferences, worked in public spaces, and traveled internationally, without anyone suspecting that her kawaii aesthetic concealed one of the country's most important cybersecurity roles. The broader cybersecurity community began grappling with the implications of the incident as news spread through professional networks. Conference organizers started implementing new protocols for attendee behavior. Companies began requiring bias training for employees with security clearances. Professional organizations issued statements about the importance of treating all colleagues with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived experience level. But the most significant changes happened at the individual level, as cybersecurity professionals confronted their own assumptions about competence, authority, and belonging in technical fields. The story of the pink laptop became a cautionary tale that spread through the industry, usually told in hushed tones during private conversations between colleagues who'd learned to question their first impressions. 3 months after the incident, I was working security at another technology conference when I witnessed a scene that showed how much attitudes had shifted. A young man with bright purple hair and clothing covered in gaming references was setting up at a workstation when two senior engineers approached his table. Instead of mockery or assumptions about his qualifications, they introduced themselves professionally and asked about his area of expertise. The conversation that followed revealed that the young man was a penetration testing specialist with clients that included major defense contractors. His unconventional appearance, like Maya's kawaii aesthetic, was a deliberate choice that helped him blend into certain environments during security assessments. The senior engineers listened respectfully, asked thoughtful questions, and ultimately invited him to contribute to a panel discussion about social engineering vulnerabilities. The transformation wasn't universal or immediate, but it was real. People began questioning their assumptions more often. Colleagues started introducing themselves to newcomers instead of making judgments based on appearance. Conference organizers implemented policies prohibiting photography of other attendees' workstations without explicit permission. Maya herself returned to public conferences within 6 months, still carrying her pink laptop and maintaining her cheerful aesthetic. But her reception was notably different. People recognized her not for her appearance, but for her expertise. She was invited to speak at major industry events, consulted on federal cybersecurity policy, and became something of a legend in circles where her real identity could be discussed. I had the opportunity to speak with her briefly at a conference in Portland 8 months after the Seattle incident. She was setting up her familiar workstation with its Hello Kitty mousepad and anime stickers when I approached to introduce myself as the security guard who'd witnessed her confrontation with Webb, Park, and Rodriguez. "I remember you," she said with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "You were the only person in that room who looked like you were paying attention to what was actually happening rather than what you expected to see." I asked her whether the harassment and investigation had changed how she approached her work or her decision to maintain her distinctive appearance. Her answer revealed something important about both her character and her understanding of the broader issues involved. "The incident in Seattle wasn't unique," she explained, while arranging her pens with their fuzzy pom-pom toppers. "I face assumptions about my competence regularly, usually from people who believe that serious technical work requires a serious appearance. But changing how I look wouldn't solve the underlying problem." She gestured toward her pink laptop, which was already displaying interfaces that looked far more sophisticated than anything I'd seen at civilian technology conferences. "The real issue isn't that I don't look like other cybersecurity professionals. The real issue is that too many people have narrow definitions of what expertise looks like." Maya explained that her appearance served multiple purposes beyond operational security. It challenged colleagues to examine their biases about gender, age, and professionalism in technical fields. It demonstrated that competence came in many forms and couldn't be determined by visual assessment. And it provided cover for other unconventional professionals who might otherwise face similar harassment. "Every time someone assumes I'm incompetent because of how I look, it creates an opportunity for education," she said. "Usually that education happens through quiet demonstration of capability. Occasionally, as you witnessed, it requires federal agents." Her perspective on the 3 men who'd harassed her was more generous than I'd expected. While she didn't excuse their behavior or minimize the seriousness of their actions, she seemed to view them as examples of broader systemic problems rather than uniquely terrible individuals. Webb, Park, and Rodriguez weren't evil people, she reflected. They were experienced professionals who'd internalized certain assumptions about what expertise looks like in our field. Their mistake was acting on those assumptions without questioning whether they might be wrong. The consequences for those 3 men had been severe but not permanently career-ending. Webb had eventually found work with a smaller firm after completing extensive bias training and accepting a significant reduction in responsibilities. Park had relocated to a different city and was slowly rebuilding his professional reputation through community volunteer work and public speaking about unconscious bias in technology fields. Rodriguez had started his own consulting firm, focusing primarily on educating other professionals about inclusive workplace practices. "Their punishment became their education," Maya noted. "And hopefully their education became other people's prevention." She showed me some of the positive changes that had emerged from the incident. Professional organizations had developed new ethical guidelines for conference behavior. Companies had implemented training programs about unconscious bias and inclusive practices. Educational institutions had begun incorporating discussions about diversity and assumption-making into their cybersecurity curricula. The Seattle incident was embarrassing and professionally disruptive, Maya acknowledged. But it started conversations that needed to happen about who belongs in cybersecurity, what expertise looks like, and how we treat colleagues who don't fit traditional expectations. As our conversation concluded, Maya was preparing for a presentation about advanced threat detection methodologies. Her audience would include senior government officials, defense contractors, and cybersecurity executives who now knew better than to underestimate someone based on their Hello Kitty mousepad. Watching her work that day, I realized that Maya Chen had accomplished something remarkable beyond her technical contributions to national security. She had forced an entire professional community to confront its assumptions about competence, authority, and belonging. Her pink laptop had become a symbol not just of hidden expertise, but of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize the capabilities that people actually possess. The three men who'd mocked her aesthetic had learned that lesson the hard way, through federal investigation and career consequences that would follow them for years. But their expensive education had become a cautionary tale that prevented similar incidents and encouraged more thoughtful, respectful interactions throughout the cybersecurity community. As I completed my security rounds that evening, I found myself thinking about all the assumptions I made about people based on their appearance, their age, their clothing choices, or their mannerisms. Maya's story had taught me that expertise often came disguised in unexpected packaging, and that the most dangerous mistake anyone could make was assuming they understood someone's capabilities without actually learning about their qualifications and experience. The pink laptop continued to control military satellites, protect critical infrastructure, and defend against cyber threats from hostile nations. But perhaps more importantly, it had become a reminder that in a field where appearances could be deceiving and where the most sophisticated attacks often came from unexpected sources, the most valuable skill anyone could develop was the ability to look beyond surface impressions and recognize competence wherever it actually existed. The incident at the Seattle Cybersecurity Conference had ended 3 careers, triggered federal investigations, and embarrassed an entire professional community. But it had also started a conversation about respect, assumptions, and inclusive practices that would make the industry stronger, more welcoming, and better equipped to recognize and utilize expertise regardless of how it was packaged or presented. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, delivered through the most unlikely means, in ways that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own biases and assumptions. Maya Chen, with her pink laptop and kawaii aesthetic, had taught an entire professional community that danger often comes disguised as harmlessness, that expertise rarely announces itself with fanfare, and that the most serious mistake anyone can make is assuming they know what competence looks like before they actually encounter it in action. 2 years after the Seattle incident, I found myself working security at the largest cybersecurity summit on the West Coast, held at the San Francisco Convention Center. The event had grown from a regional gathering to an international conference that attracted over 15,000 professionals from 43 countries. As I walked through the exhibition halls, checking vendor booths and monitoring crowd flow, I noticed something that would have been impossible before Maya Chen's pink laptop changed everything. Workstations throughout the convention displayed every imaginable aesthetic choice. Laptops covered in band stickers sat next to machines decorated with family photos. Gaming setups with rainbow LED lighting operated alongside minimalist black workstations. Professionals wore everything from traditional business suits to cosplay costumes, from vintage band t-shirts to formal evening wear. The visual diversity that had once marked someone as an outsider now represented the new normal in cybersecurity conferences. But the changes went much deeper than surface aesthetics. Conversation patterns had evolved. Instead of making assumptions about colleagues based on their appearance, attendees had learned to lead with questions about expertise and experience. Networking sessions began with discussions of technical challenges rather than commentary on personal style choices. Professional introductions focused on capabilities and accomplishments rather than visual first impressions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without resistance. Some old guard professionals complained that conferences had become too casual or unprofessional. A few companies struggled to adapt their hiring practices to evaluate candidates based on technical skills rather than cultural fit defined by appearance. But the broader momentum toward inclusion and respect had become unstoppable, driven by the undeniable fact that diverse perspectives produced better security solutions. Maya herself had become something of a legend within the cybersecurity community, though she maintained her preference for working behind the scenes rather than seeking public recognition. Her technical contributions continued to be classified at levels that prevented most details from being shared publicly, but industry insiders knew that several major advances in satellite security, encryption protocols, and threat detection could be attributed to her work. She still carried her pink laptop to conferences, still used her Hello Kitty mousepad, still wore clothing that expressed her personality rather than conforming to traditional professional expectations. But now her presence at events was welcomed by organizers who understood that her attendance elevated the technical quality of their programs and attracted other experts who might otherwise have felt unwelcome in cybersecurity spaces. During the San Francisco Summit, I had the opportunity to attend a panel discussion where Maya was speaking about emerging threats to critical infrastructure. The audience included senior government officials, Fortune 500 executives, academic researchers, and representatives from international cybersecurity organizations. Her presentation covered technical concepts that were beyond my understanding, but I could see the attention and respect she commanded from some of the most knowledgeable professionals in the field. What struck me most wasn't her technical expertise, impressive as it was, but her ability to create an inclusive environment where other unconventional professionals felt comfortable participating. During the question and answer session, queries came from people who might previously have remained silent at such high-level discussions. A young woman with bright blue hair asked about quantum encryption vulnerabilities. A man wearing a shirt covered in cartoon characters contributed insights about social engineering attacks. A presenter who used a wheelchair provided perspectives on accessibility in security system design. Each contribution was valued, discussed seriously, and incorporated into the broader conversation. The diversity of viewpoints led to insights that wouldn't have emerged from a more homogeneous group of participants. Maya had demonstrated that inclusive practices weren't just morally appropriate. They were professionally advantageous for organizations serious about addressing complex security challenges. After her presentation, I approached Maya during a break between sessions. She remembered our previous conversation in Portland and asked about my observations of how conference dynamics had changed over the past 2 years. I shared what I'd noticed about increased visual diversity, more respectful interaction patterns, and broader participation in technical discussions. The changes have been remarkable, she agreed, but they represent the beginning of a longer transformation rather than a completed evolution. The cybersecurity field still has work to do in creating truly inclusive environments where everyone can contribute their best work regardless of how they look, where they come from, or how they express their professional identity. She told me about initiatives she was supporting to expand cybersecurity education in underserved communities, mentor programs connecting experienced professionals with newcomers from diverse backgrounds, and research projects exploring how unconscious bias affected security assessments and threat detection. Her influence extended far beyond her technical contributions to encompass systematic efforts to make the entire field more welcoming and effective. The Seattle incident taught us that assumptions about competence based on appearance aren't just harmful to individuals, Maya explained. They are operational security vulnerabilities that prevent organizations from recognizing and utilizing available expertise. When we exclude people or underestimate their capabilities because they don't fit our expectations, we weaken our collective ability to defend against sophisticated threats. This perspective had gained traction throughout the cybersecurity community as organizations realized that diverse teams consistently outperformed homogeneous groups in identifying vulnerabilities, developing creative solutions, and adapting to evolving threat landscapes. Companies that had previously prioritized cultural conformity began actively recruiting professionals from unconventional backgrounds, recognizing that different perspectives enhanced their security capabilities. The 3 men whose harassment had triggered the original incident had each followed different paths in the years following their professional consequences. Webb had used his experience to become an advocate for inclusive practices in cybersecurity, speaking at conferences about unconscious bias and consulting with organizations on improving their workplace cultures. His talks drew large audiences and received positive feedback from professionals who appreciated his honesty about his mistakes and his commitment to promoting change. Park had relocated to Austin and established a cybersecurity training program focused on serving military veterans transitioning to civilian careers. His program explicitly welcomed participants from all backgrounds and emphasized that technical competence could be developed by anyone willing to put in the necessary work. Several of his graduates had gone on to successful careers with major technology companies, and his program had become a model for inclusive technical education. Rodriguez had perhaps traveled the furthest from his original attitudes and assumptions. After losing his position and spending months reflecting on the incident, he had returned to school to study the social and psychological factors that influenced workplace behavior. His master's thesis examined how unconscious bias affected security assessments in corporate environments, and his research had been published in several professional journals. He now worked as a consultant, helping organizations identify and address bias in their security practices and personnel decisions. During the San Francisco conference, I encountered all three men at different points throughout the event. Each was attending as a respected professional in good standing with the cybersecurity community, but their presence served as reminders of how quickly careers could be derailed by assumptions and poor judgment. More importantly, their redemption stories demonstrated that people could learn from serious mistakes and use those experiences to contribute positively to their professional communities. Webb approached me during a networking session to thank me for my testimony during the federal investigation that had followed the Seattle incident. He explained that my detailed account of what I'd witnessed had helped investigators understand the sequence of events and the motivations behind the harassment Maya had experienced. "I know this sounds strange coming from someone who caused so much trouble," Webb said, "but I'm grateful that the incident happened, and that there were consequences serious enough to force me to examine my assumptions and behavior. I was a better cybersecurity professional before the incident than I am now, not just technically, but in terms of my ability to work effectively with diverse colleagues and recognize expertise wherever it exists." His transformation seemed genuine, supported by years of consistent advocacy for inclusive practices and public acknowledgement of his past mistakes. Other professionals who worked with him described someone who actively challenged bias when he encountered it, and created opportunities for colleagues who might otherwise have been overlooked or underestimated. Park's evolution had been equally significant. When I spoke with him at a booth promoting his veteran training program, he described how the incident had forced him to confront his assumptions not just about Maya, but about many other colleagues he'd dismissed or underestimated throughout his career. "I realized that my success in cybersecurity had made me arrogant," Park reflected. "I thought that being technically competent gave me the right to judge other people's qualifications based on superficial observations. The federal investigation was humiliating, but it was also educational in ways that probably saved my career and definitely made me a better person." His training program had graduated over 200 veterans, many of whom had initially been dismissed by other employers as too old, too unconventional, or lacking traditional qualifications. The success of his graduates had demonstrated that cybersecurity expertise could be developed by people from any background when they received appropriate training and mentoring opportunities. Rodriguez had perhaps undergone the most profound personal transformation. His research on unconscious bias had made him a recognized expert on the psychological factors that influenced professional interactions in technical fields. When I attended one of his conference presentations, I was struck by his ability to discuss the Seattle incident objectively as a case study in how assumptions could lead to professional misconduct and security vulnerabilities. "The harassment I participated in wasn't just wrong because it hurt Dr. Chen personally," Rodriguez explained to his audience. "It was operationally dangerous because it could have compromised critical national security systems. When we allow bias to influence our behavior toward colleagues, we create security risks that extend far beyond workplace dynamics." His presentation included data showing that diverse cybersecurity teams identified vulnerabilities faster, developed more creative solutions to complex problems, and adapted more effectively to evolving threats. Organizations that prioritized inclusive practices consistently outperformed those that maintained traditional hiring and promotion patterns focused on cultural conformity. The broader impact of Maya's story extended beyond the cybersecurity community to influence practices in other technical fields, where similar dynamics had historically excluded or marginalized unconventional professionals. Engineering firms began reevaluating their dress codes and cultural expectations. Technology companies implemented training programs to help managers recognize and address unconscious bias in hiring and promotion decisions. Academic institutions incorporated discussions of diversity and inclusion into their technical curricula. Professional organizations across multiple industries developed new ethical guidelines addressing respectful treatment of colleagues regardless of their appearance, background, or personal style choices. Conference organizers implemented policies prohibiting photography of other attendees without explicit permission and created reporting mechanisms for harassment or discriminatory behavior. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than procedural. A generation of technical professionals had learned that competence came in many forms and couldn't be assessed through visual inspection. This lesson influenced not just workplace behavior but also approaches to problem-solving, team formation, and innovation strategies that recognize the value of diverse perspectives and unconventional thinking. During my final day of security work at the San Francisco conference, I witnessed an interaction that perfectly captured how much attitudes had changed since that afternoon in Seattle 2 years earlier. A group of senior executives were examining a demonstration of advanced threat detection software when they noticed that the presenter, a young man wearing clothing covered in anime characters, was producing results that exceeded the capabilities of their current systems. Instead of making assumptions about his qualifications or dismissing his work based on his appearance, they engaged him in detailed technical discussions about his algorithms, asked about his educational background and professional experience, and ultimately offered him a consulting contract to help improve their organization's security capabilities. The conversation was respectful, professional, and focused entirely on technical competence rather than visual impressions. The executives asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to his responses, and evaluated his proposals based on their potential effectiveness rather than whether he looked like their existing employees. This represented the new normal in cybersecurity interactions, where professionals had learned to separate appearance from ability and to value expertise, regardless of how it was packaged or presented. The transformation hadn't been complete or universal, but it was substantial enough to create meaningfully different experiences for people who didn't fit traditional expectations of what technical experts should look like. As I prepared to leave the San Francisco conference, I reflected on the journey that had begun with Maya Chen's pink laptop and 3 arrogant engineers who thought they understood everything they needed to know about competence and belonging in cybersecurity. That incident had triggered a cascade of changes that rippled through the entire professional community, ultimately making it more inclusive, more effective, and more capable of addressing the complex security challenges facing organizations and nations. Maya continued her classified work protecting critical infrastructure and national security systems, still carrying her Hello Kitty mousepad, and still wearing clothing that expressed her personality, rather than conforming to traditional professional expectations. But now she worked in an environment where her expertise was recognized and valued, where colleagues treated her with the respect her qualifications deserved, and where other unconventional professionals could see that success in cybersecurity didn't require abandoning their authentic selves. The 3 men who had harassed her had learned from their mistakes and become advocates for the inclusive practices that their own behavior had violated. Their professional redemption demonstrated that people could change, grow, and contribute positively to their communities even after making serious errors in judgment that had significant consequences. The cybersecurity field had evolved from a community that often judged people by their appearance to one that prioritized technical competence and diverse perspectives. This transformation made the entire industry more effective at its core mission of protecting digital infrastructure and sensitive information from increasingly sophisticated threats. Walking out of the San Francisco Convention Center for the last time, I thought about all the lessons that had emerged from a single afternoon of harassment that escalated into a federal security incident. The importance of treating colleagues with respect, regardless of their appearance. The danger of making assumptions about competence based on visual impressions. The value of diverse perspectives in solving complex technical problems. The recognition that expertise often came disguised in unexpected packaging. But perhaps the most important lesson was that change was possible when people were willing to examine their assumptions, acknowledge their mistakes, and commit to doing better. Maya Chen's pink laptop had controlled military satellites, but it had also controlled something equally important: a transformation in how an entire professional community understood competence, respect, and belonging in technical fields. The story that began with mockery and harassment had ended with education, redemption, and systematic change that made cybersecurity more inclusive and more effective. Sometimes the most unlikely catalysts produce the most profound transformations, proving that progress often came from unexpected sources in ways that nobody could have predicted or planned. The pink laptop continued to protect national security, but its greatest contribution might have been protecting the dignity and potential of every professional who looked different, thought differently, or expressed themselves differently, while possessing the expertise their communities needed to address their most challenging problems. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.